Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast. This audio podcast is part of the Parenchymal Journal series. This audio podcast is part of a Battlestorm Swarm. This audio podcast is part of a Bostix Vortex. This audio podcast is part of a Storm Robotics production. This audio podcast will be a sort of a synopsis or an overview as part of this Parenchymal Journal series. As thus, the use of social media today provides unparalleled opportunity to provide and receive education, access to communication and interaction. Social media, mainstream media, such as television, newspapers, magazines, and radio stations, have been used and are being used or have been used to prompt education surrounding specific long-standing or long-term conditions. Certainly, the use of social media is not limited by constraints around time and geography. The aims around this works was where three questions were put forward. Number one, is there an Islamic stance on the use of social media mainstream media to prompt solid organ transplantation education? Number two, can Muslims and those within the faith donate organs? And three, does do healthcare professionals such as laboratory specialists have a basis in providing the public education surrounding solid organ transplantation? Uh, the long-standing condition chronic kidney disease or CKD will be utilized to provide a basis. So in around the literature or the sort of review around this works, there is a requirement for multi-channel approaches, so that the issue is more of a social norm in context of primary care, where at the same time where healthcare professionals can can prompt a bit can prompt sort of the basis, the educational basis in around disease in around solid organ transplantation, but also in around underlying disease pathology, where uh, where um, where where awareness is concerned. In around the Islamic basis for around this, if a Muslim decides to donate in around a solid organ transplant, in around solid organ transplantation, they are to do so. They can do so and should do so out of free will without being morally or socially forced, and without economic pressures. If a deceased Muslim if a deceased Muslim indicated during life, for example in a will, that they do not want to donate organs, then no one has the authority to do this on the deceased person's behalf. So the in around sort of the sort of the summary aspects of this works. So more educational campaigns through social media, mainstream media involving healthcare professionals, and sort of healthcare professionals, for example, who are not sort of patient facing healthcare professionals, have an important have an important have important have an important role and to provide transparency, for example, where other healthcare professionals can find can find can find aspects challenging, or where other healthcare professionals, for example, seek to identify expertise. At the same time, clarity around terminology to help increase health literacy and around topics regarding and relating to solid organ transplantation is especially required, owing to where the public where the lay public can spend time can spend time more time online. So in around the sort of sort of overall summary. Uh, so in around in around the in around this works, there were three questions. Three questions. For example, number one, in around these questions, there was one is there an Islamic stance or basis on using social media mainstream media to prompt solid organ transplant education? Number two, can Muslims donate organs? And number three, does do healthcare professionals from laboratory specialties, for example, have a basis in providing the public education surrounding solid organ transplantation, and the questions are answered are postulated, and through this series are answered with applicable evidence base with a particular applicable evidence basis. That draws this audio podcast synopsis to a close. This is an audio podcast as part of the Parenchymal Journal. This an audio podcast as part of the Battlestorm Swarm. This audio podcast is part of the Bostix Vortex. This audio podcast is part of a Storm and Bostix production synopsis. This audio podcast with the series will have there will be a list of further sort of works where listeners can identify literature and works in around this audio podcast series across the social media and on social media so that draws this synopsis to a close.